Welcome to NFL Daily, where it's always West Coast, best coast. We are here in the Chris Wesseling podcast studio. And by we, I mean myself and Jourdan Rodrigue of The Athletic. It's like we're back in New Orleans, just a two-person show, the two of us.
I know. I feel like I just saw you, Greg, although you went through some things.
You did.
Between the last time I saw you and now. So glad you're doing better.
You did. You saw us on Tuesday's show with Colleen Wolfe. You remember that? That was great. I started the show saying West Coast, best coast, because we're talking a little NFC West. We are continuing our off-season division previews with the NFC West, a division you have been intimately familiar with. A lot of drama for the last 5 years as you've covered the Los Angeles Rams. And the West Coast really is the best coast. And it's not just because all you suckers back east are just dealing with all that snow and everything like that. Like, that's the number one thing. But the number two thing is the time zones is better. Like, the Pacific time zone is just better for sports. And if you're listening to the show, sports is probably important to you. It's important to me.
I would actually push back on that slightly.
No.
Watching sports, it's the best to be in Pacific time. However, when you come into this time of year, which we like to refer to as Gregg season, often the news happens on East Coast time. So you need to be up at an ungodly hour in order to make sure that you're keeping up to pace with everything. Luckily, a lot of these NFC West teams, they actually do transactions on West Coast time too. So it's just everyone else that you got to worry about.
That's a fair point. Now that I'm on old man time and a child's time, I'm up early anyway, so give it to me. I love it. I love it all. We're going to go through all four teams in the NFC West. We'll ask one big question about those teams. We'll look at guys that could get cut, stuff like that, and we are going to start with you. Let's start with the Seattle Seahawks. I don't want it to be predictable with you starting with the Rams. How do you want to kick it off with the Seahawks?
Switcheroo.
10 minutes on the clock. Let's go.
Yes. I think the biggest question for the Seattle Seahawks actually interconnects to many other questions about how they're going to, A, get under the cap, and then B, balance their roster and the future of their roster structure. It is, how will they overhaul their offensive line this year? I think that they could stand to replace 4 of the 5 spots. Now, I don't know, Greg, if they can do that all in one offseason between the draft and free agency.
The Chiefs had that season where they're like, we're going to fix the offensive line. We're going to do it in 1 year. And they did it. But yeah, good luck trying to draft Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith in the same year.
Yeah, it's just so easy.
It's not that easy. But they threw money at the problem, and they did it. That's one place to start. And it was really interesting listening to John Schneider speak on a local radio show. It was the first time he had spoken since after the season. And he said, we know exactly what our deficiencies are. And then immediately started talking about how good the Eagles are at developing their offensive line. So he left no mystery. He knows what the problem is, and yet he's been there the whole time, and it's been a problem the whole time, and he hasn't really done a very good job. He said we got to develop offensive linemen better, but like he's done a bad job picking them.
We're all trying to find the guy who did this.
Right. Exactly.
So yeah, this is an issue. I mean, you could see where they've tried to fill in a couple, especially their interior spots, with backup middle to later round to late middle draft picks who you could see potential spurts and flashes. We'll get to that in a minute. But if you're looking at, again, 4 of those 5 spots outside of left tackle, and Charles Cross is due for an extension. PFF had him ranked their 10th their 10th tackle of 141 tackles in the NFL this year. But everybody struggled, and it derailed so much about their offense. It did not help that then coordinator Ryan Grubb just seemed to have issues finding answers and having solutions. Running the ball was a big issue. Pass protection for Geno Smith was a significant issue. It just was something we talked about all last year ad nauseum. And they're looking at a center, Connor Williams, who retired. I don't know that we've talked about that enough. Literally had a center retire on them, who they just brought in to help alleviate some of those issues. And then they're struggling at their guard spots, and certainly on the right side, they had no answers all year. That was the worst, one of the worst problems anywhere along any offensive line in football, was that right side of their line. And it is interesting that you brought up John Schneider, because last year, wasn't he the one that was just talking about how paying guards is overrated, and guards are overpaid and we should draft them? And it's like, we're still waiting.
Well, on one hand, he could be, there's something right about him, which is that I think an offensive line coach and system can make that true
Yeah.
if you can find the right one, but they never have found the right one. And so they hire Clint Kubiak. He also brought in offensive line coach John Benton, who was with him in New Orleans, who's a veteran coach. So you're hoping that can help things out. The offensive line was okay in New Orleans last year. They had a center, Oluwatimi, who helped. They had a young late pick, Lamea Santeo. You're trying to develop these guys. You're going to throw money at the problem. All right, let's look big picture. Seahawks, $13 million in the red as of this taping. So they are actually over the cap. They have a lot to do. They do have 3 comp picks coming to them this year, so that's nice. Here's some of the decisions that they'll have to make in terms of getting under that cap space. Geno Smith.
Yes.
Do you extend him? Do you do that to lower his cap number, which is $44 million right now? Or do you just see how he looks in the new system? Tyler Lockett, a $17 million cap hit, probably going to get cut. Draymond Jones, $16 million in savings if you cut him. There's 2 guys right there where I just lopped off about $33 million. Even when teams are over, it's not that hard to get under, but those are some of the decisions in terms of veterans on their roster they can, address to get under the cap.
It's easy to get under the cap, but in terms of the investments that Seattle might have to make in free agency with this offensive line, some of the top tier guys, I don't even know if they're going to be able to truly go after them unless they significantly restructure the way that they're going to handle this cap situation. Not just a release of Tyler Lockett, which would save them $17 million, not just a Jones release, not just a potential, what would the numbers on a potential Geno Smith contract extension look like in 2025 versus in the years past that? Would it help alleviate some issues in 2025? But then, he's 35 years old, and you have to think about what comes after 2025, especially pairing him with a third offensive coordinator in 3 seasons. And you can't be certain that you actually have fixed the offensive line at that point.
What do you think? Do you think they want to commit to Geno past this year or not?
I couldn't tell you what they're thinking.
Yeah.
But
what do you do?
I would. I mean, I would say he could probably play till he's probably 38. And I think what you can see sometimes with a lot of these veteran players is the preference to do some of these 2 or 3 year deals. Now, would he take that? Now, I can't speak for what Geno would or would not accept. He's been through it the last couple of years, had to put a lot on his shoulders, that there's been some chaos and dysfunction around him. But they also have a lot of players coming up that they have to start thinking about beyond this year. Boye Mafe, Rick Woolen, DK Metcalf, they're all entering their contract years. We haven't even talked about yet whether they're going to potentially re-sign inside linebacker Ernest Jones, who's going to be a free agent, who clearly thinks he can get a good price on the market because they were in contract discussions and then they paused them, probably because his agent learned that he would have a nice little market and be able to maybe get some more money out of whichever team, including Seattle. So they have to think in 2025 how they can navigate this, not just get under the cap, but actually invest in key positions that would help Geno Smith. But then they also have to think about Geno Smith and what load that contract is beyond this year when some of their star players at premium positions are due.
Yeah. Geno, like I said, $44 million cap hit. They could lower that by extending him out another year. They're also being risky. If he looks great in this system, then he could suddenly be headed to free agency and they'd be worried about having to be in a bidding war for him. My guess is they'll want to see how he looks here and maybe just live with that cap number. But I think it makes sense if you wanted to extend about. I think he'd take whatever. Not whatever, but he's at that mid-level quarterback. He's not going to make the Joe Burrow money, but his money, which, this year is going to be plenty of salary, is not that far below. Like he's in that, $40 to $50 million range. If they wanted to extend that out another year or 2, I guess they would do it. You have a good point mentioning Rick Woolen. I think both him and DK Metcalf are sneaky trade possibilities. If you didn't think you were going to pay both of them.
It is interesting, though, because you can tell based on listening to Clint Kubiak, who spent a little time with Justin Jefferson, you can tell that he really wants to work with him. Now, whether that's, I don't think.
With Geno.
With DK.
Oh, with DK.
I don't
Yeah, why wouldn't you? By the way, everyone in Seattle who's like, how come they don't trade DK Metcalf? It's like, why would you trade DK
He's a monster.
Yeah. He's not quite A.J. Brown. He's certainly not Jamar Chase, but having a top 15 wide receiver with a very defined skill set is very valuable.
And all I'm saying is I don't think that Clint is coming in there his first day on the job and throwing smoke screens out there. Like, I just don't think that they operate.
I don't think
he's
going anywhere, to be clear.
Yeah.
I agree.
And so, but yes, obviously he will receive interest every year that they don't have an extension done with him, and he will be due for one after this season. But it's interesting because I don't know how this Kubiak-Geno Smith pairing is going to go. I don't know that I would necessarily tie my quarterback's future with somebody who struggled last season in New Orleans. And it's interesting because they have to find this synchronicity. They have to find a collaboration. And I have no doubt that Geno Smith will be able to work in whatever system with whoever. But to have, if you're Geno and you're thinking, okay, if they're going to wait on my extension, if they're going to wait for this to possibly work, I don't know how I would personally feel about that if I'm in that position, because you're handing this guy his third offensive coordinator in 3 seasons, and you've asked him to put everything on his back, the 2 of the last 3, and haven't protected him.
Okay.
Time flew. Oh, my God.
Yes, it does go fast. When I thought about some free agents that they might look at, like Drew Dahlman is going to be the top center. That's going to cost a ton of money, but that would be a perfect fit for the Clint Kubiak system, kind of a zone running scheme. DJ Reed, who's a former Seahawk, would they? I know they're good at cornerback, but that would be something where maybe they would swap him out for Reek. One positive though is that they don't really have many key free agents. You mentioned Ernest Jones. Really, him and Jaron Reed, their defensive tackle, are really their only key free agents, the only 2 in my top 101. Ernest Jones is pretty high, but that's good. So they don't have a lot of issues. They have a lot of great players coming back, especially on offense, really on both sides of the ball, I should say.
I would keep an eye, too, on left guard Aaron Banks, who Clint Kubiak is familiar with from his time together at the 49ers. All those interior spots have to be figured out, and right tackle.
And he might be a little cheaper.
0.
Perfect. Let's talk Cardinals. The question I'm going to ask is, how does Monty season play out? And this is Monty Ossenfort, a guy who's barely been mentioned on this show because the Cardinals have been lying in the weeds, just collecting war chests of cap space and not really spending and adding all these small little players. But this is his 3rd offseason. This is the season that Monty Ossenfort is going to push. So it's not just the regular season.
The regular season. I love that so much. Oh, my God.
Shout out to Jackson Bevins.
That's incredible.
Our friend who hosts Cigar Thoughts. He sent me that idea. I was like, oh, I'm going with that.
I know, Jackson. Hopefully we did the Seahawks justice. I know he's like way more in the weeds on it than I am.
It's the regular season. Okay, Monty Ossenfort. They have $69 million in cap space right now. That's the 4th most. And they can actually open up quite a bit more if they would like to. Jonah Williams, for instance, they could save $10 million. He's coming off a huge injury. And so how does Monty's season look? Because the Cardinals would be high on my list of teams that are going to be in the mix this offseason. And to me, there's kind of 2 different routes that they could go. Is it spreading that money out with about 5, 6, 7 starters, and I do think that's the type of aggression we're going to see out of the Cardinals? Or are they going to be one of the teams that goes really big splash, a couple other starters and then, lower level players? How does Monty's season play out? Because this team, to me, 3rd year, the way they've built it up, it's like go time for the entire organization.
I think the smart thing, and what I would do if I were Monty, I am not, as that is hopefully very clear to people watching and listening.
He is a bald man.
Yes. But I would do the latter, because I don't think this is a particularly deep or very, very strong free agency class. I think that they could be ready to win if they make win a lot of games, if they make a couple of key additions and like little prune and tweak in a couple of key spots, which we'll get to. So I think that this is one of those teams that you can make a big splash. I think that they could potentially be in the market or in the running for like a Milton Williams, for example.
Okay.
Somebody who will come in and be a day 1 investment, a difference maker, someone that Jonathan Gannon will have been watching Vic Fangio go through the second half of this past season and watching his old coworker go into the postseason with this really strong defensive line that became a defining characteristic of this team. And I also think that, he is a player that you would potentially make a significant investment in.
Oh, man.
And then with such a ripple effect, you then prune and pick elsewhere. They have 6 draft picks, so they're going to have to make the most of every single one of those.
So this is why it's great to have you aboard, have 2 people thinking about this. I somehow didn't even think about the fact that it's Jonathan Gannon running this team in a year where all these Eagles defenders are available.
I know.
Because it's not just Milton Williams.
And they have money.
It's Josh Sweat. Like, they could certainly be a Josh Sweat team. Zach Bond, I think, would fit in terms of versatility, what they do. So that might be someone that they're negotiating against. They can have their cake and eat it too, though. Like I was saying, it's a decision, like, do they go big? And then it's a couple like lesser ones. $70 million, they have too much cap space. Everyone that is that high up, there's just not enough good players that you're going to be able to keep in. So you can have your cake and eat it too. I think they're one of the more likely teams to go after a Micah Parsons if he's available, a Max Crosby.
You're really pushing that one. I've noticed that.
It's intriguing. A T. Higgins, if he's like, there actually isn't a position, and I went through other than quarterback that I'm like, no, that wouldn't make sense. So any of the top level play, a Jeffrey Simmons would make sense. Like, they can do multiple things. It's a really, I wouldn't say a great cornerback class in terms of free agency, but that's where there is a little bit of depth, and they could certainly use a cornerback. So whether it's a DJ Reed or a Paulson Adebo or a Carlton Davis, like there are 5, 6, 7 pretty high quality cornerbacks to go after. And this is a team that, look, if they just decide they want T. Higgins, they could decide to be that team to go get T. Higgins and just go over the top, whether it's with a draft pick and money, in his case probably, or just with money.
Yeah, and I would like to see them build out that offensive core past Trey McBride and like sometimes Marvin Harrison on a good day when he and Kyler have actually spoken that week.
Let's recap it quickly. Connor is there still in the backfield with Trey Benson. McBride, the great young tight end.
Yes.
Marvin Harrison, you're going to want to see him improve. Michael Wilson, a piece there, and Greg Dortch, who they can't keep. But not.
But you also, Greg Dortch, the rare fan favorite in Arizona. Everyone loves Greg Dortch. You almost can't.
He'll be in the mix.
Yeah, you just keep him as like a 5.
But they could use another.
Yes, they could.
Starter.
You can see what I do like about this Cardinals roster, even though they underwhelmed, in my opinion, last season. And part of that, too, I know we'll get into when we talk about the coordinators and all of that coming back for another year. But it was, you could see where their holes were. It's almost like they were showing their work. They've done this. They've been this team that's done this the last two seasons. Is the first year they had, nobody, especially on defense, and you're basically just trying stuff and seeing what sticks. You're doing the walk around defense thing. You're just trying whatever you can and see, okay, what actually fits and who actually we have that we can build around. And then the second year, you could start to see them putting a couple more pieces together. You could see these players who they are going to keep. Some of the cornerstone pieces, a James Conner, for example, a Trey McBride, really emerging as like heartbeats of this roster. And this year, you still see, when you go over, like you said, position by position, you could see where they need to fill these holes.
Pretty much the whole defense except the secondary. I mean, the front 7 and the defense, they need a lot of work.
Yeah, and going back, you're probably going to only be able to pick one of those. You could probably plug the back end with some of these cheaper veteran corners that'll be on the market. Mm-hmm. If I'm Jonathan Gannon, I invest in the front. And I think a lot of teams are going to be looking especially at what the Eagles have done. And Jonathan Gannon knows that building intimately, like we mentioned. And I think that they're going to look at that front 7. And I think that's where the money is going to go. The interesting thing is I think some of this too is premeditated when you're looking at all of the different books around the league and you're looking at all the contracts and everything. If you're an executive, what a lot of people don't, and I don't know what year the Cardinals as an organization are in this spending window, but every 3 years you have to hit.
It's time to spend. They need to.
Every 3 years you have to hit a minimum spending threshold. And they certainly have not been spending over the last couple of years. So this is something where they could be ready to max out, and they could have been waiting for this moment for when these Eagles players are available.
I actually like this exercise. I just said that they're going to be one of the most aggressive teams. I almost want to rank like who I think is going to be in the centerpieces of a lot of these discussions this offseason, like the top 10 teams, because I think the Cardinals would be one of them. Now, they have a lot of good continuity, as you mentioned, with the coaching staff.
Yeah.
That's why it's a push year. They have good continuity on offense. They're really bringing back almost all their starters. defense needs a lot of work. They have a left tackle they love in Paris Johnson, a center they love in Froholt. You could certainly improve along the edges with the offensive line, especially at right tackle. Some decisions to make. Kaiser White, I mean, you named your kid after him if you're the defensive coordinator. You kind of should bring him. I would think that's good leverage, but who knows? They might look to upgrade. There actually are a lot of good off-ball linebackers available, so that's a possibility there. Will Hernandez is a guy that's been good for them and was hurt last year. Maybe you bring him back, and you're not losing many good players. I mean, Baron Browning, I think, was the only Cardinal on my top 101, and he was a midseason trade acquisition that really didn't do well, and I'm only putting him on the 101 just because he pops,
he's young,
but he's never really produced.
I keep waiting for him to take that next step because you see the tools, and I keep waiting for him to put it together.
So they are in a really great position where the kind of the world is their oyster, and the Austin Fort connection. I knew there was a reason I wrote Simmons down. He was with Jeffrey Simmons in Tennessee as the director of player personnel, and that's a player that might be available. But I think you're absolutely right. They could really use some linemen, and they could use edge guys, and they could especially use like 3 down, just bigger like run stoppers. They are gonna be adding. Maybe they're not all gonna be big splashes, but I think there's gonna be some big splashes. I'm excited about the Cardinals.
Yeah, I'm always excited about the Cardinals when this new regime came in because I really like the way that they think. I like the way that they game plan. I like the way that they are super fluid and multi-directional, multifunctional on offense and defense, even though they've been super limited in personnel on defense. And I think that Drew Petzing and Nick Rallis, them coming back as these young offensive and defensive coordinators, Jonathan Gannon now having some more head coaching experience under his belt, I think it's all good things for Arizona. They just can't flail in the middle of the season. They can't just lose steam because they had the NFC West. They had it.
They did.
And then
I think
they
if you
lost
look at the whole picture, they had the progress that they should have had. Like this roster, like I was saying, especially on defense, was not great. They've played
it was lacking, I think.
Yeah, like they've played over their skis, really. So overall, I like that it's been steady progress. You didn't think that we would be able to do this in under 10 minutes. You thought we'd honk too much, but we're having great pace here. Let's take a quick break. Just count it down. We'll be back in a second. Back on NFL Daily, previewing the offseason for the NFC West. Still in the mix, I think, as the best division in football. I know they're not coming off their best season. You got a lot of teams in this division where you would say it wouldn't be that surprising if they were playing in the divisional round. I think all 4 teams, you could say that. There aren't many divisions like that. We're going to go to the 49ers, one of the best teams in the NFL over the last decade, really, half decade, and coming off a brutal season. But they have a lot going on this offseason. Let's start the clock here, Eric. $43 million in cap space already, and can open up more room. An extra 3 comp picks. They've already redone a lot of their deals that they've signed. So actually, they're a team that can't restructure too many guys. They've gone to the bank so many times. Fred Warner is actually the one guy I think they can go to the bank for and open up even more space. But
NFL Daily star Fred Warner.
Yeah, they don't have a 5th round pick. I learned this. I didn't know this because they quote unquote miscalculated the salary cap last year. But they weren't found to have done nothing wrong. They just miscalculated the cap. Why is it always the 49ers, by the way?
Press the wrong button on the calculator.
Yeah,
oh, no.
I don't know about that. So they had their 5th round pick taken away. My big question is, how does a team that needs to get younger in free agency? Because this is a team that's going to have to be active in free agency.
They will, but I don't know that that's the best spot to be in, again, with this free agency class. And that's I think the biggest question because they need some youth. They need some revitalization. They need some energy. To me, when I look at the 49ers, and they've been such a powerhouse for so many years and really the aggressors to so many teams across the entire league, not just the NFC West, I see burnout. I see a team that's burnt out, that's tired, that really needs to commit one way or another to either infusing with this draft class and infusing with that kind of personnel and really nailing that class to kind of replace or eventually replace in the next 2 years or so some of the aging stars that have been so productive for them for so long. Or again, they're going to keep patching this with older players. And I don't know in this free agency class that that's necessarily the best thing to do.
Well, you say burnout, and I just have the image of Kyle Shanahan
just gaunt.
just looking out into this was a burnt out team last year. Now I think they're gonna at least talk a big game all offseason of like, we're revived. We had a shorter offseason, like we're ready to come back. But how do you infuse the team with youth when you're gonna have to fill some real holes in free agency? And that's by not going after the Leonard Floyds. And maybe I guess Yetur Gross-Matos wasn't like an older free agent. They've had a tendency to go after older free agents like Trent Williams. They're going to have to find some younger free agents that can play for them. Like if it was a Dayo Dengbo from Indianapolis, whether it's De'Ami Brown, not that they're probably going after a wide receiver. That was a bad example. Some of the younger free agents, because they absolutely will be going after free agents to cut, to address a number of new moves. I'm going to list some players I think are likely gone from this team. Number 1, Charvarius Ward. He says he wants to leave. He's one of the best free agent cornerbacks out there. Had personal tragedy.
Kind of a heartbreaking
and he said it's really been
there.
hard for him to be in California after the tragic loss of his kid. You really feel for him. Talanoa Hufanga. They're pretty good at safety right now. He's been injured after that all-pro season, probably gone. Javon Hargrave, they say they'll either going to cut him or he'll accept a pay cut to stay. Most likely he'll hit free agency. And then Aaron Banks, their guard, who they mentioned earlier. Deebo Samuel also is very likely to get traded if he doesn't get cut. Leonard Floyd likely to get cut. So there's a lot of players that had pretty big roles that probably will not be on this team next year. Yeah,
and it's interesting. There are some replacements that you could see potentially taking over for some of those guys. I know that they really love Hufanga, but he just might have a pricier market than they're willing to pay. Jair Brown would probably be back starting for them in that case. And then the receiving core, that's where I have a lot of questions. Actually, I mean, everywhere on this roster, I have a lot of questions, but their receiving core is Brandon Ayuk, who significantly underwhelmed after signing that deal. Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, Jacob Cowing, and then
I think they're good there. Honestly, I'm not. That's one position group.
But they'll have to play different. They're going to be playing differently. They have to play differently.
They got to get better.
Playing in the past, those guys do have to get better. But also, they're becoming with those players. They're more of a perimeter team than necessarily some of the Yak Bros style that we saw with Debo, with Kittle, with McCaffrey when he came in as a receiving threat as well. They're just going to have to shift their play style. Now, I do think that Brock Purdy showed he can be that type of a thrower at the beginning of this season. I think he was making the most of sort of a sketchy situation up there with some of the just alternating personnel, and he was throwing the ball downfield in a way that we hadn't necessarily, there was a lot of chatter. I think we like Brock Purdy, but there was a lot of chatter about, can he actually do this? So that's where some of the new blood, I guess, will come from. Some of those younger receivers. I could see them drafting a running back as well. I mean, you can't, I'm not saying Christian McCaffrey is done for at all, but that's a scary injury. And we see when he's at his best, he is the best. But I could definitely see them getting younger and infusing a little bit more in there too.
Well, it's Kyle Shanahan, so he always loves to draft a running back, whether it's in the 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round. Garendo last year was a 4th round pick. Jordan Mason, it was pretty good as a backup.
Really, Greg, what I'm curious about here with the 49ers is, do you think that they're maybe going to be stronger in the trade market than necessarily they would be in free agency? My colleague at The Athletic, Matt Barrows, he actually sees them being interested in a Myles Garrett, getting on the phone for a Myles Garrett. I know that Myles Garrett is again, another older player, but he's Myles freaking Garrett. But I wonder if that's where they're kind of maybe looking to just infuse other personnel into this roster, just to do something a little different, to shake things up a little bit, move the furniture around a bit.
I think it makes sense for them to go big on defense. When you look at their offense, it's all coming back, basically, except for Aaron Banks and Debo. But they've really prepared for the Debo. defense to me is almost a bigger concern from a team building perspective. That defensive line that they were known for year after year really calcified. I mean, even when Hargrave was healthy, they were thinner than before, but then Hargrave got hurt and suddenly it was Nick Bosa and 3 or 4 replacement level veterans. So I look at both their lines as something they could really stand to improve. They've never really invested like a ton of resources outside of Trent Williams and, some early-ish draft picks, but not a ton. I really feel like they need to rejuvenate their lines, ideally with draft picks to get younger, but maybe it'll be with a big-time player. And it's a theme with all these conversations that if it's not Garrett, like it could be a different edge, like a Trey Hendrickson or something.
Yeah, well, but I mean, in free agency, they will be competitive, I think, for some of the guys, the Josh Sweats, that kind of a player. At the same time, like, we can't forget that Bob Saleh is back there as defensive coordinator. So they're going to go back to that sort of OG wide 9 that they were playing. So they need to add at least one more strong, if not very strong, edge rusher, and probably draft somebody to eventually fill in once they enter a world without Nick Bosa. You're not going to obviously replace him 1-to-1, but you got to at least start onboarding somebody to take maybe some snaps eventually if you need to. And they also need a really stout, strong, aggressive, disruptive defensive tackle. Like, just because those edges are what everyone looks at in the wide 9, you mentioned this, some of the personnel shifting that they did on the interior the last couple of years really hurt them. And they absolutely need a disruptive, like 3-tech or like a nose hybrid player in order to really make that thing sing.
They have a lot of needs. I mean, their best defensive tackle right now is Malik Collins. Second best is like Jordan Elliott. They don't even have a second edge rusher. I guess it's Yetur Gross-Matos, but they could cut him in addition to Leonard Floyd, who I mentioned I fully expect will get cut this offseason. One name I didn't mention that I should have in terms of free agents is Dre Greenlaw. And the word is that, your boy Bob Saleh wants him back. That's going to be a tricky contract because if you remember, he tore his Achilles during the Super Bowl and he returned last year. And for the 3 quarters he was on the field, he actually looked like the best linebacker in football for the 3 quarters. You're like, wow, he's over the Achilles, but he quickly re-injured his calf, which is, in the same area, didn't play the rest of the season, and will be someone I think teams that run this defense across the league will be looking at. So he won't necessarily be easy to keep. So they have a lot going on this offseason. It's going to be tricky. Is John Lynch going to just be their GM forever? Does he not so much would they get rid of him, but more like, does he want the job forever? He, former announcer and stuff. You hear some whispers he might not be there forever. That's all.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I honestly, when I always look at the power structure up there, everything goes through Kyle Shanahan and the owner. So that's where
all the more reason to think like maybe John Lynch isn't there forever, even if it's his decision. Like, he's not the one running the show.
Yeah, it is an interesting question. And then it should be noted too that Josh Williams, who is kind of his number 2 out there, is in the finalist interviews for that Jaguars GM job. So is there a contingency plan? They have sort of one foot in their previous era and one foot that needs to step into their new era. And I think that's really fascinating for them because any sort of pivot into a half measure, I don't think is going to work.
Right, because they actually have drafted some players to prepare for this day. Renardo Green, Lenore, Malik Mustafa in the secondary.
I love him.
Some good young players. Obviously, Brock Purdy, some of their wide receivers. And yet, who are their best players? It's Trent Williams, it's George Kittle, it's Nick Bosa, it's Fred Warner. It's still all those guys, and they're not going anywhere. I should mention, before we go to the next team, the word from the 49ers is they do expect Trent Williams to return to the team next year, and John Lynch made it clear they are welcoming him back under his big salary. So that's big offseason news for them. Let's wrap up with the Rams.
Nicely done. That's an experienced veteran host right there. Incredible. So my big question for the Rams is actually kind of interestingly similar to the 49ers, which is, will they keep 1 foot split into their previous Super Bowl era with a couple of their aging stars, not just Matthew Stafford, but also Rob Havenstein and Tyler Higbee? Or will they completely move into this readier to win sooner than expected era of young players because they've nailed the last 2 draft classes? Obviously, the question starts and ends with Matthew Stafford. We've talked so much about Matthew Stafford that I don't really think we need to do a ton more other than sort of maybe refreshing that conversation. But if they do decide to step into this new era, they're going to have holes to fill at both tackle spots, right? They're going to need a bona fide tight end because Sean McVay is tired of rotating 3 tight ends who are like subpar.
Yeah.
And they're going to need a new number 2 receiver to be in tandem with Puka Nacua.
And a number 3 receiver.
And a number 3
and
receiver.
A number 4
and
receiver.
a number 4 receiver.
So DeMarcus Robinson, who was productive for them, and Tutu Atwell are both free agents, in addition to Cooper Kupp, expecting to get traded or cut if they can't find a trade for him. More than anything, when I was looking at the Rams roster and situation, they have $37 million in cap space, which is a ton, which is more than enough, and they can open up some more. They do not have a second round pick. More than anything, I thought, man, it's hard to rebuild the team on the fly. What are you laughing at?
My advice to the Rams is don't go spend that money yet because their second year players that like 10 of them start for them are going to come due, and a couple of them, including Steve Avila, Puka, Kobe Turner, they're going to be due. Byron Young due for early extensions, and they just started that spending window, that 3-year window, the minimum threshold window. They just started it last season, and they did not spend other than on a guard that does not play for them currently, which we'll get to in a minute. But my advice is don't go spend in free agency. Don't go buy, because they don't have a good track record when they actually go out and acquire veteran free agents. That third tier is where their money is made there. The picking up cheap veterans, the Akello Witherspoons, some of the guys they brought in 2023 to help supplement that young
DeMarcus Robinson,
rising
guys like that,
roster
role
core,
players.
guys like that, role players. When they've gone out and actually spent big money on free agents, and I fully expect them, by the way, to overhaul this process similar to when they overhauled their draft process a couple of years ago under James Gladstone. I feel like they have to just avoid it right now because it's Allen Robinson, it's Bobby Wagner, it's Jonah Jackson, who, again, they have to figure out what to do with. That's a 3-year, $51 million guard. If you cut him or trade him before June 1st, it's an $11.5 million in dead money hit. And then you have dead money in the coming years too. And it's basically like you're not playing him. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do with him?
They would save $9 million to the cap at least. You're spending a lot of cash if they spread that out as opposed to June 1st. You mentioned Havenstein. They would save $9 million if you cut him. Their left tackle, Alec Jackson, an undrafted player who's played pretty well for them, is a free agent. Do you think they might keep him or no? Because he actually is he my top tackle available because he's young and he's been serviceable. And there just aren't guys like that. Cam Robinson, I believe I have ranked ahead of him, but Alec Jackson.
He's going to have a market. That's the thing. I don't think they're willing to be super competitive in that market, but they don't have a plan behind
But they have huge needs. That's the thing. It shows how hard it is. And that's what I was trying to get to, that how hard it is to rebuild on the fly. Because their last couple of drafts could not have gone better. Practically everyone they've drafted has been an offensive or defensive rookie of the year finalist. Puka Nacua, Steve Avila, he wasn't a finalist, but he could have been. Kobe Turner, Braden Fisk, and Jared Verse. All these like massive hits, although they are missing their second round pick this year because they used that to trade up for Braden Fisk. So it was a good job that you hit on that.
Yeah,
I hate
they're
doing
fine
that.
on that.
Yeah, I get it, but 2 picks for one guy is
for a defensive rookie of the year finalist.
You gotta hit.
Probably would have won it depending.
You gotta hit. It's very risky, and they did it. They do have an extra 3rd round compensatory pick because Raheem Morris took that job with Atlanta, and as part of the Rooney Rule, that's something they get. So that's a positive. But man, despite all that, they have some massive issues. Cornerback, they don't really have cornerstone guys to build around. Linebackers, they literally just don't even have any linebackers. You mentioned tackle, wide receivers, and then, oh, by the way, quarterback. So despite all of the good things that they've done, and if they could have won the Super Bowl in the last couple of years potentially if things had gone right. They weren't in the top 3 or 4 teams, but they were in kind of that 6, 7, 8 range when the season ended. It didn't happen for them, and they still have a lot to work on.
I would say for the Rams, if I were them, I would go into this offseason as if they have like literally 0 players at left or right tackle. And I say that because they are simply not going to get into a high dollar, super competitive market with Alaric Jackson. If he wants to stay, and if like they want to try to extend him before free agency hits, if it's a good fit, if he there's all these other variables that could come into play.
They need to work ahead a little bit better on these moves.
But I expect him to have a robust market, and it's just not something, as of my last understanding and my last reporting on this, it's not something that they're gonna like get into the highest levels of salary with him. And then Rob Havenstein's entering the last year on his deal. Now the offensive line was far less functional statistically, and you could see it all over the tape when he was not on the field versus when he was on the field, but he's had trouble staying on the field for the last couple of seasons. And he is one of those players, along with the Tyler Higbee, who are, again, similar to Cooper Kupp, representative of that previous era of this Rams roster when they have showed no qualms about moving forward into this new phase. But I would operate as if they have no tackles, because I don't think their backups are good options. Warren McClendon, and then it was Joe Noteboom on the left side, who was just not a good, again, another free agent signing that they paid and that they should not have paid, and then became a backup left tackle. And it didn't work out for them. And so they have to operate as if they have a surplus at guard, which they do, because now Bo Limmer will probably be their full-time starter moving forward. And he was a 5th-round pick from last year. He started most of the season, played well other than the last 2 snaps of that Eagles game when he fell for Jalen Carter's fake step. And they are set at left and right guard. They need those tackles, and that to me is the absolute number one priority. And it also,
you'd think quarterback would be high up there though if they don't have one. But
I'm glad that
all
you
these
said
other
that.
things.
I'm glad that you jumped in to finish my sentence before I actually finished it. But the number one thing that they have to do is figure out what that left and right tackle financial structure is going to look like in tandem with whatever their plan is for either a year-to-year situation with Matthew Stafford, a 2-year that's front-loaded with him, or trading him.
I think they could be. Why not be a Kirk team? They're kind of a sneaky line in the weeds. Why not? Because if they have all these other issues and they're still sort of rebuilding, and they seem very open to moving on from Matthew Stafford and maybe getting younger too with some picks that they could get back for him.
I think
this feels like an in-between year, and Jimmy G seems like the most likely guy with a pick potentially, but Kirk Cousins is potentially another.
I think that they watched him play football and they know Raheem Morris and Zach Robinson really well, and I don't think anyone is rushing to endorse that situation. But I do think that a bridge quarterback could be a solution for them if they do decide to move on from Matthew Stafford, which again, the best way that they stay competitive is getting a deal done with Alaric Jackson. I'm not sure they're going to be able to do that. And also getting a deal done with Matthew Stafford and kind of just running this group back for another shot and figuring out what you're going to do with Jonah Jackson, and then maybe bringing in a run-stopping, disruptive defensive tackle who you don't actually need to play a full snap share because you've got the middle of that short up on pass rush downs.
Yeah, their linebackers get picked on. They need some young cornerstones at cornerback. It's just a lot. There are a million kind of bridge quarterbacks available, though. So that is one thing there's a lot of.
They've got that going for
them. Justin Fields, a Jameis, a Mariota, Daniel Jones.
I think Mariota would be a sneaky, really great fit.
And then draft a 2nd-round quarterback or something with your Stafford pick. Some sort of combination like that.
Yeah, and they have Darius Williams in the 2nd year of a 3-year deal. So, and he played really well down this back stretch after he came back from the hamstring injury. But they usually only pay one corner at a time, so I would expect them to go deep into the draft in that position. They tried that 3 years ago. None of those picks really panned out. Kobe Durant is solid, but he was in a rotational role by the end of last season. They're good. I think they're good. They're set at safety because of some of the drafting that they did and some of the undrafted free agents that they brought in. Jalen McCullough, and then Cam Kitchens was their 3rd-round pick. It's interesting because they do have so many questions at inside linebacker yet again. and they were the team that infamously shipped out Ernest Jones probably too early.
Kind of weird in hindsight.
But they did it because they believed in Omar Spates, and Omar Spates really emerged, but they need a second linebacker.
We ended the NFC West recap the only way we could, with a in-depth Omar Spates discussion. I love it. That was the NFC West. I keep going through these divisions and thinking, man, this team's got a lot to do. Man, this team's gonna be in the mix. It's a big offseason. Every team thinks they're having a big offseason. That's what it's just not easy. These 4 teams, especially, I think the Seahawks are in a kind of a medium position.
Yeah.
The Cardinals are in a kind of a great position where you want to be, where it's all push, all additive, whereas the 49ers and the Rams are having to do a lot of different things, holding on while pushing forward at the same time. And Les Snead, John Lynch, Monty Ossenfort, and yes, John Schneider. They'll all be earning their salaries this offseason.
It is interesting. We presented a lot of problems, right, for them to solve. But it kind of feels like all of these teams, any one of them, are maybe 1 or 2 correct decisions away from being ultra competitive again, if they weren't already. Mm-hmm. And so that, I think, is the sign of a really strong NFC West. It's a sign of really strong team building for the most part, all around.
I'm always fascinated by this division. That's it for our NFC West offseason.
We did it in time. Woo! We're alive.
Plenty of time. We're going to keep these offseason previews going. We're going to have some NFC South talk coming up. But this is it for today's show. Look, when we're criticizing Monty Ossenfort, it's regular season. That didn't make any sense. I wasn't criticizing him.
We like him.